Good morning, afternoon, evening, colleagues. My name is Erik Brogt. I'm a reader in academic development at the University of Canterbury in Christchurch, New Zealand. Today, I will discuss some of the basics of human ethics processes in astronomy education research. I will focus on the ethical pitfalls that we have to be aware of as AER researchers, in particular for those of us who do research with the students we also teach. Ethics is a cardinal principle in educational, socio-behavioral, and biomedical research. For those coming to AER from the physical sciences, this may be a new and unfamiliar concept, but it is absolutely critical. Just like in astronomy, you wouldn't expect to get time on a telescope without going through the time allocation committee. In AER, you wouldn't expect to recruit participants or take data without prior ethics approval for your study. This is professional conduct and in some jurisdiction a legal requirement. The purpose of ethics is to minimize risk and impact on participants through good design, methods, and processes. The goal of the ethics review is to provide an external peer review of whether you have done that. It's not for us as researchers to determine, but for an independent body. Minimizing impact can mean both in terms of the numbers of participants involved, the types of tasks they are asked to do, or the types of data requested from participants. For those of us who do AER with the students we have direct access to, the students we teach in our astronomy classes, this presents a conflict of interest between our teaching responsibilities and our researcher duties, and is further complicated by the inherent teacher-student power imbalance. The ethics process is there to help you work through those issues in a systematic way. You don't have to get ethics approval for everything you do. Things like teaching evaluations, internal evaluations for quality assurance and enhancement processes are typically exempt. However, as soon as you want to go outside your institution, as soon as you have an intent to publicize, which is a broader term than publish and also includes conference talks and the like, you must get ethics approval prior to the start of your study. So, if you're not sure whether you want to publicize, just apply for the ethics approval. It makes life easier down the line, as most ethics committees will not approve projects retroactively. The contents of an ethics application will vary somewhat by jurisdiction, but in essence cover these 5 things here on the slide: recruitment, methods, informed consent, privacy and confidentiality, data storage, access, security, and future use of the data. For some more details on each of those, I refer you to some of the resources that are listed at the end of this presentation. But mostly these 5 items are answers to questions that you would have when somebody approaches you to take part in their own study. Like, who is doing this? What is it for? Can I say no? What am I asked to do? What will happen to the data? Is this going to be published? Will I be identified in that publication, etc.? So in the next couple of slides, what I will do, go to some of the most common ethical pitfalls associated with some of these 5 items. Researchers doing research on the students that they also teach. The threats of voluntary participation and power relationships are the most common. As teachers, we hold inherent power over our students, so students may feel pressured to participate in your study simply because it's their teacher in control of their grades who is asking them to participate, even if they want to say no. So that risk will need to be mitigated. The most common ways are having an assistant consent the students and collect the data with the teacher not in the room, and for the assistant to remain in control of that data, anonymize it if necessary, and not have the teacher have access to the data until the end of the course when the final grades have been submitted. A second risk is in inducements to participate or penalties in not participating. For example, by tying participation to a portion of the course grade or extra credit. Don't do this. It again pressures students to participate and carries the additional risk of social desirable data. That means that students are saying what they think you want to hear rather than their true opinions or ideas. A third risk is data that you have access to in your capacity as a teacher, like student GPA or other information from the student management system or class roll, and using it for research purposes. It is important to have a very firm wall between the data you can see as a teacher and the data that you can see as a researcher. If you want access to particular student data, ask for it in the ethics application. Don't assume that because you can see it, you can use it. An ethics committee typically also has jurisdiction over methods and can and will ask you for modifications if they think that the methods are not appropriate to the study. It's not that common, but it does happen. I mention this because I've seen many studies in AER, not just AER, but also in other discipline-based education and research projects, where people really want to hold on to the true experiment, the randomized control group, the randomized intervention group, and really want to use statistical methods or quantitative methods. Right? However, a true experiment is not always feasible. You can't just take your class and say, well, half of you are the random control group and half of you are the random intervention group. That means that you may be withholding benefits from students, and that is not ethically allowed. The other thing is that with the use of quantitative methods, it may not be appropriate for the research question. And the ethics committee can just legitimately question whether you have minimized impact on your participants if your data are unlikely to be able to help you to answer the research question because you're in essence wasting your participants' time. So for many beginning AER researchers coming from astronomy and physics, qualitative methods are not necessarily familiar and they may feel less robust than quantitative methods. But honestly, this is nonsense. Both qualitative and quantitative methods have their strengths and weaknesses, and they are both part of the toolbox of educational researchers. What you use depends on the research question. It would be a case like what is better, photometry or spectroscopy in astronomy? Both are tools that have their place and are suitable to tackle a particular set of research questions. The last risk in methods that I want to mention is asking for data that is not tied to your research question or for which you have not a good theoretical reason to ask for it. So you can think here of things like age, ethnicity, gender identity, or any other demographic data. In many studies that I've seen, people are asking for this data, and usually that is done for what I would call a fishing expedition, where they ask for this data, run a whole batch of correlations just to see if anything shows up statistically significant. But in doing that, you're not minimizing the impact on your participants. You don't have a good theoretical reason to ask for this data. So you're asking for more data than you need to ask to answer your research question, so you have not minimized impact. Right? So unless you have a good theoretical reason to ask for particular data, just don't. With regards to data security, a lot of this is common sense, but as you may know, common sense is remarkably uncommon. Password protecting computers, files or folders, regularly backing up on secure servers or protected external devices, that should be a no-brainer. But in my experience, it's definitely not always. The main thing I would like to talk about here is about using somebody else's data, or you wanting to share your data with somebody else. From an ethics perspective, it is critical that participants have either consented to secondary use of data, or that the data is properly anonymized and declared as such to the ethics committee. Right? It's good practice to declare all your data sources to the ethics committee. A data set that was gathered for one purpose cannot simply be shared and used for a different purpose without approval. This is different from the way that we do things in astronomy, where data sharing and merging of data sets is really common. But in educational research, you cannot do that without ethics approval. So different jurisdictions have slightly different rules about this. For example, some allow anonymized data to be shared without ethics approval, where others don't. So please consult with your local ethics expert on how sharing of educational data works in your jurisdiction. Consulting with local experts is always a good idea if you're just starting in astronomy education research. As I said, different jurisdictions have different rules, and it's important to adhere to the local rules. Some are a lot more stringent than others. Here I've listed some colleagues that you might have at your institution who would be able to help you and or collaborate with you on your project. I would highly recommend that if you're just starting out in astronomy education research, that you collaborate or consult with colleagues in education. They'll be able to help you with sort of research design, methods, ethics, and just make your study stronger and therefore more publishable. So I would strongly recommend consulting with your colleagues. There's no point reinventing the wheel. The last point that I'm making here on this slide, Erik's golden rule, is critical for me personally. As a teacher, our primary duty is to our students. Us doing research benefits us personally, but not necessarily the students. So if we do research, it is imperative that the student experience and our duty of care to our students is not diminished in any way. Even if that means a suboptimal research design or a study taking longer than it normally would, so be it. Right? Our students, in my opinion, always come first. And I will leave you with some of the resources about ethics that my colleagues and I wrote a number of years ago. These were written largely for the US context, but the principles discussed in those papers and chapters, they apply more broadly to other jurisdictions as well. And with that, I want to thank you for your attention and enjoy the rest of the conference.